had KubeCon, and we're all still recovering. But we did a workshop with, especially Mark is still recovering, with Agones and Open Match. And it's like 2 hours, and it's on our YouTube channel, which we can put a link to the exact recording. But it was a fun workshop with Robbie and Mark and John did some of the parts of the presentation, and there's a really fun game that had created that also was fun for people to play during the workshop. We actually had some people that just like abandoned the workshop and just sat in the back playing the game. So, and then Robbie had an amazing talk on Open Match at KubeCon in front of a whole bunch of people. And full keynote room of people, and he did a live demo in a 5-minute talk, so he got a lot of street cred for that. We also have that recording, but I don't have that on our YouTube channel, but we can do the link. So we have a lot of good stuff from KubeCon, and a couple of some good conversations with other gaming folks. And yeah, that was pretty much our big highlight for our projects. Mark, Robbie, anything you want to add?
I think that was the highlights. I think I linked to the first recording. I'll stick a link to the second one in the notes. I think there were, I don't know how many, Mark, do you have an idea of how many sort of gaming info folks were there this year compared to last year? Did it seem like there were more, fewer, about the same? Like,
probably about the same.
KubeCon itself is growing pretty rapidly, and I think the CNCF posted that 65% of the attendees this year were new, right? Hadn't been to KubeCon before, which is pretty amazing. It seems like maybe in the gaming side that people, like a couple of folks we talked to, they said like the Kubernetes tracks, they weren't learning necessarily a lot of new things. They were learning more new stuff from like the gRPC tracks and some of the sort of the ancillary stuff. And so maybe there's it's mature enough for what they're doing that there's less of a reason to go at this point, and maybe we'll run into more people at like GDC type conference. I don't know.
I'd say it was probably about the same. I think probably, all up from the people I met and like people I heard were around. There's probably about 20 people from AAA Game Dev, which is probably about the same as last year.
It's interesting that I think they just did like an infographic of the transparency report, because they do one after every conference, and the third country of attendees represented was Japan. Oh, so I saw, some other comments that there were a fair amount of Japanese gaming companies that were there. So yeah, hopefully it's becoming more of a, as more companies start using Kubernetes, then there's more of an interest. But
maybe we just don't know those folks, and so we didn't run into them.
Yeah. But I think that, hopefully it becomes a good spot to kind of talk more about some of the different things people are doing with Kubernetes. And did anybody put in a talk to KubeCon EU? The deadline was like last night.
No.
Oh, is the deadline over?
The deadline was last night, and then there were people like, on Twitter with like, hey, so now it's time for me to start thinking about what kind of talk I'm going to submit. Day of, it's pretty standard.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a tough deadline because it comes right after KubeCon, and then the timing, like Cyril and I were chatting yesterday about like you have GDC and then KubeCon, and then there's just a ton that's going on around that same time frame. So it is a lot, but we'll see what happens in EU, and then the next KubeCon will be in Boston. So.
Colder.
Mark, have you been to an EU KubeCon? Do we know if there's a similar level of presence from gaming studios there, like from maybe some of the European studios?
I could have sworn, didn't you go before, Mark?
No, I submitted and they rejected me.
Oh, rude.
I tried to submit my Agones talk and they were like, no.
Yeah, Robbie, I think it's probably about the same, but I don't know for sure. And then I don't know if EU is going to have the same level of newbies that, North America did.
Cool.
But Yeah. So yeah, that was KubeCon, and then our next big one is GDC. So who's going to be at GDC? No one's committing yet. All right.
I'll be there.
Mark raised
I raised my hand.
He'll be there.
Yeah, but you don't count. Like I knew that
I
part
don't
already.
count.
Yeah.
What am I, chopped liver? Like what?
I was more referring to, people that aren't on the immediate team. So anywho, that was our trip to San Diego. Let's see. Mark, would you like to talk about the 1.2 release candidate, which I believe was a thing you did yesterday?
I did. I finally got it done, even though it was a day late. I blame pneumonia for getting that done. Also laziness. Let me actually pull up the change log so that I remember the things that I want to talk about. Big thing with this one, we're upgrading to Kubernetes 1.13. So you'll want to upgrade your clusters, which brings us back in line with the supported version, which we say that we're going to support, which is good too. What are we actually even supporting on GKE these days?
Be meaning Google?
Yeah, I'm just curious. That's usually at the front, so it's usually the one I keep an eye on. Yeah, we don't want to slip behind. Basically, my point is we don't want to slip behind what the stable channels are for the cloud providers. And no, we're looking like we're on track, which is good. So that's the big thing. If you're using the Unity SDK, that's almost complete now, which is nice. I would like to wrap that up. That'd be good. Various other hardening type things and bug fixes and whatnot as well in there as well. Some local SDK tooling features, that kind of stuff. So more good things. Moving forward with always more good things.
I did want to mention you put in the notes about the change to 1.13. The other change that people should be aware of is with the SDK server ports. In 1.2, the default ports have now been changed to be non-ephemeral ports, which should fix a bug where sometimes the SDK server wouldn't come up because the port was already in use. This means that if you are using default configuration with a 1.2 control plane and a 1.0 or earlier SDK compiled into your game, that things will not work. The quick fix is to change your YAML to actually specify in the YAML for 1.2 the ports that we used for 1.1 and 1.0, and that will fix your problem without having to recompile anything. But we also recommend that you upgrade your SDK to a newer version because then you actually have the ports configurable in the SDK. And if you're using a REST client, then you actually have to do a little bit of work yourself.
There's an environment variable, which I can't remember the details of, but I'm pretty sure we documented somewhere.
Yes, I put in the documentation. There's an environment variable we pass in, but if you're making the HTTP request yourself, then you have to actually listen to the environment variable. And again, if you can't do that, you can always just tell the SDK server to go bind to the old ports. That will all still work just as well or flaky as it did before. I mean, it wasn't super flaky. We didn't get a lot of bug reports on it, but we definitely saw issues where it wasn't working.
Yeah, it seemed like people either really had the issue or never had the issue, and it was one or the other. Cool, that's me.
Sorry, a question on that. What's the recommendation? Is it to bind the port or just let it automatically allocate?
I would use the environment variable, I would say.
Well, do you mean, I think the question was like, if you're using 1.2, should you explicitly specify the port in the YAML, or do you just leave the defaults? And I think the answer is that as long as that port doesn't conflict with something else that you're using, the defaults should be fine. When we actually default the port when you create your object, so if you create a game server and then get it back, you'll see the port that we assigned to it, and that'll get persisted for you. So as long as it's working, you don't have to specify it, right? I think it's really there in case you have an issue where, like, for some reason you really want to use that port for something else, then you can change it.
Thank you.
And it's also there for compatibility, so that if you're still using an old SDK, you can set it to the old port value.
I don't think we actually document what the default port is now, or am I just looking at the wrong thing?
That's a good question. I thought we did.
Oh,
it's in the CRD documentation for sure.
It's in the local one as well.
Okay.
Actually, that output's wrong. Yeah, we don't use that 5.9. But anyway, we'll get that fixed up.
Maybe I should add it to the client SDKs page where we talk about what the variables are and say this is the default. All right.
That's what I was thinking. Probably the local one needs to be updated too, but cool.
I think that was everything for 1.2.
Cool. Stephen and Cami, you want to do a recap?
Yeah, so we were lucky enough to speak at Google Next London last week. Was it last week, I think? Or 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
So it was just a 15-minute chat. It was with Panos Kafantanis. Probably pronounced that incorrectly. Talking about Agones. So he went through the demo with the Zonotic game server. And then we talked about our game Snake Rivals for about 5 minutes at the end. It was quite a packed session. I think it was fully subscribed with 150 people sitting there and some hanging over the wall. So yeah, we had got a bit of interest in that as well. I think there was quite some interest in a managed version of what we'd achieved. I guess our case was a bit special in that we're using clusters in different regions around the world. So I think that was the interesting aspect.
Nice. Do you have? Did you get any sense of like whether you're getting a lot of interest because people were like games, yay, cool, or whether it was like I build games, therefore I'm at this session?
The people that came to talk after the session were definitely all from the game dev scene. Interestingly, there was a person that spoke to me from Faceit, and they're wanting to, they want to provide their own matchmaking systems. So they were very curious about Open Match and why we weren't using that. So they're not game dev, but kind of in the scene. But other than that, everyone was a game dev.
Sweet, awesome,
That's great.
fantastic.
And then
Sounds like your guys' talk was just as successful as our one at KubeCon then.
Yeah, it was the same week too, so it was a tough it was a busy week for all of our people. Next, you have GCP podcast.
Yeah, I just spoke to some of your colleagues. Mark, don't remember his last name, but another Mark.
Mark Merchandani.
There's
okay.
too many of them. That's the problem.
We have a Mark club now. It's getting ridiculous.
Yeah. So yeah, that was fun. I just spoke about why we decided to use it, and I got some feedback. Some people connected with me through it, and I think most of them that listened to the podcast and actually just talked to me after were not game devs though. They were more interested in distributed systems and how we achieved the global solutions for our game servers.
I was looking for a link to that. There it is. I'll put a link to the episode in the notes. I apologize. My dogs are very vocal this morning. They're always vocal, but dang, Robbie, you are on it with the links, man.
So Cami, when you talked on the podcast, did you talk at all about like how you built the system globally, or was that something that was sort of glossed over and that's why people were reaching out to you about it afterwards? Because it seems like that if people are asking about it, it seems like that would be something that would be great to have sort of on the general feed. And maybe too late now, but it seems like if that's something that everybody's excited and interesting about, it sounds like both from your talk and from the podcast that people were interested in how you guys got that working.
I don't really remember. I can't tell you right now. Like, I think I mentioned it quite a bit because I think that was our biggest challenge to solve. So I think I mentioned it like in depth. Yeah, I can't tell.
I'm just digging through the transcript.
So we probably would have mentioned CubeMCI in that case.
Yeah.
Oh, yep, I see that there.
There you go.
Yeah, transcripts. also have a third-party section of the website for like presentations and stuff. We should add a podcast section. Because there's yours, there's the one I did with Cyril ages ago on the GC podcast. There's probably some other ones we can add in there too.
I think, Mark, you did on the Google Kubernetes podcast with Craig and Adam at some point.
Yeah, I think there's one of those too. So there's more resources around. All right, I will.
And we should, if we have a link to the video from next, we should add that to the presentations section as well.
That's a good idea.
I don't know if it's available yet. There's a delay, but yeah, it should be. I think they said in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I look at the workshop too. There's all sorts of good stuff in there. I'll make it a reminder to myself.
I was gonna say maybe make an issue or whatever.
Something.
It's a good time to move the documentation website into the docs repo. I'm just gonna keep casually mentioning that until we do it.
Sorry, I didn't understand. You want to say that? Okay.
All right, let's go on to the next item while you're doing that.
Yep.
Reduce the amount of dead space here. So Cami, you've got the next couple. Why don't you just kind of run through them?
Okay, so the first one is that we have noticed that our billing is quite high when it comes to logging. In fact, it's higher than our instance cost, is our logging cost, and in GCP. And yeah, I just went through like all of our services and tried to determine where most of the logging comes from. And to no one's surprise, I found the issue. So I thought I might bring it up.
That sounds like a good thing. Please file a ticket. There are definitely lots of places where we like log the entire game server object, for example, or entire patches coming through webhooks. We could probably move some of that stuff into debug.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Alex actually added a flag to set the log level on the SDK server because some people were complaining that it was too verbose. I don't know if you guys. I think that was in 1.1 that got added. Alex might remember better.
But we could probably do the same thing in the controller, or have a Helm configuration option. I think there's probably like especially where we do like full dumps of the game server object to JSON, that could probably be moved to debug as well.
Is that the kind of log you were seeing a lot of, or is it?
Well,
That's a good question.
There's a lot of logs coming in controller. Like controller is spammed every almost millisecond. So I guess the game servers, while they're a bit of concern, they don't live that long, so they calm down for a while.
What would be awesome is if you file a ticket and if you can see what the most egregious stuff is, then we can
get you that.
But we should totally do like a verbosity level stuff and then probably start pulling some things in different directions.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think switching the log level down to debug, I think would be super easy. Also, if you just found them and wanted to send a PR, just like change info to debug in a bunch of places. I think the slightly harder part is going to be like what Helm configuration, whatever we want to do to like allow people to pick what log level they do want.
Shouldn't be too hard.
Maybe.
I mean, we do it with the SDK server, so we could probably just shift it across as an argument.
Yeah, I will put a link for that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Seems like that would be useful.
And the next thing is that, we had previously had issues where the Agones controller shut down or restarted. And it haven't happened yet since last time. However, we haven't made any decisions on like what to do if it ever happens again or to anybody else. And Mark suggested previously that it should probably, when it starts up, sync up with health checks with game servers. But I was just curious, are we going to do anything about it?
I haven't done anything about it yet. Anything else? Probably, actually, in some ways, what would be really cool is if we had an end-to-end test that ran a bunch of game servers, shut down the controller, deleted a bunch of stuff, and then just and then spun it back up and be like, all right, do we end up in the right space where we should do, and that kind of stuff. But no, I don't think no one's done anything on that yet.
Should we make a decision? I would feel much safer if there was some sort of safety net, because when it last time happened, it was like in the middle of the night, and then we didn't know until the morning, and it's kind of scary place to be. when you have a production game running.
That does sound like a good thing. We should do some work on that.
But I mean, to clarify, are you asking for us to decide like how we should fix it, or are you asking for us to actually fix it? Because I think in the meeting note that you added was like how we decided what to do, and we can decide what to do and put it in the GitHub issue, but that doesn't actually address your concern, right?
That is true.
You actually want
yeah,
it to be
yeah. I have an idea on how possibly to fix it, but like until I would actually say first step is build an end-to-end test where we can like replicate some of the issues, and then we can be like, okay, what are the solutions? Because I can guess what the ideas might be, but I don't know if they actually work or not.
Exactly. Yeah.
But ideally, would like it having fixed for the next release.
You and your requirements for production workloads is like, I mean, fine.
That does
right. Go then.
Yeah, busy.
Actually, I'll add a note to the issue since we're here.
Yeah, that brings up a good point that like we at some point should start sort of trying to decide as a group how to prioritize what's coming in future releases. Right, because there's been a lot of interest. I stuck an issue later on the agenda that people have brought up recently. We also have the issues that Mark filed about player tracking, right? So there's a number of things that have sort of bubbled up as sort of feature requests that we've been trying to figure out, like how do we decide what to do next? But we also need to make sure we're balancing, like you said, fixing production issues with feature requests and how we invest our time.
Yeah.
Plus the churn of, keeping up with Kubernetes versions and other little bits like that.
gRPC versions, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We do actually have a process defined sort of for like deciding what goes into a release, and that's the technical steering committee that should do that and all of that. But
we don't actually have a technical steering committee.
Yeah, till this point, it's pretty much just been this. So we could make it a point maybe for the next meeting in January to kind of go through all of that and prioritize things, or we could do it on GitHub, or probably both. But yeah, that's probably a good thing. I just feel like if we do it now, people will forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point the other point is we can all sit down and say, here's what we should do. And we can make a stack ranked list, but then like it's actually up to the people that are doing the work to either, follow that list or choose the things that they want to send PRs on, right? Like if we have a sort of a drive-by contributor that sends us a PR, we're not going to say, no, sorry, you should have taken the top thing off of our priority list. Right?
Yep. Probably more prioritization of work for core contributors.
Yes, I think that's really what we should say is for people that that are working on this, 20, 30, 50% time, like, can we agree on what we think is the top priority for them to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Or we could just have you do it all.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I never failed in the past, right?
What could possibly go wrong? Mark, you broke something with the linter?
I don't know if it's CI being buggy. I don't know if anyone else had any ideas. It seems fine when I restart it occasionally, but just I posted in dev. I don't know if anyone had any. It's like it goes, the linter just says, where are we? It just says, cannot find any Go files. Yeah, context, loading failed, no Go files to analyze, which like is brand new and I've never seen before. So I don't know if CI is just being really funny or I don't know. If anyone has any good ideas, I just hate it when things randomly break for no reason I can determine. That's better.
Is operator error not an option?
I can't see anything that changed. It's really confusing, but it could also just be something got deployed to Cloud Build and now suddenly it just doesn't like us for whatever reason. But anyway,
I guess the only thing I think of is if there's like a race condition between like the images not being like, if we don't have explicit dependencies on like the right ordering and the image we depend upon is not there, or like you said, something changing Cloud Build where it's there, but we don't always get like a reference to it or something.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen similar things where like we've moved stuff and there's been a race condition that only happens sometimes, but I don't think we have any other move commands. It's all copy stuff now. But I could be totally wrong. So if anyone sees anything, feel free to raise it.
I can see something, but I don't know if it's. You've got a double slash there. Does that doesn't mean there's a path missing
Where am I looking?
in the log? Workspace / build double slash.
See, none of that's changed in forever. So maybe. Usually double slash is fine on Linux. Doesn't really care. I will. Where's the double slash? Oh, I see. Double build slash. Like that double slash is used for everything. That's all like the standard mounts. So, like make old. I don't know. Maybe. I give it a definite maybe. And then why does it work sometimes?
That's what makes me think it's a race condition, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like a race condition. If it works sometimes, it doesn't work others, and you're not changing anything, and you just hit rerun, and it starts to pass, right? And the question is that a race condition that has always been there and is getting tickled more often? Is it something that we changed recently that we introduced, or is it something that Cloud Build changed recently that they introduced, right? I think that's the hard part to track down.
Yeah, computers.
And I see simulation in Golan CI linter, so probably it is just Golan CI feature bug. I will copy a link just for you. So it is open.
Oh, you mean there's
but
a
it contains,
maybe if we upgrade the linter, it'll work? Is that what you're saying?
no, it's I mean similar stuff, but yeah, let me check this. I'm not sure if it's similar what we have, but error is the same.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Nothing changed.
The second comment on that is really interesting because the guy says that if you can't build your project, it spits out this error that it can't analyze files, and it's basically saying it can't build.
Oh, interesting.
Like run, go, build, or go test first is what they say.
Interesting. All right, that gives us
Maybe that points us in a good direction.
Maybe something weird's gone into one of the files in the recent release and it gets tripped up occasionally.
Now you have something to work on today.
All right.
The next thing you had was for gRPC with Cyril.
Yeah, Cyril's not here though, so I don't know if we can. Basically, I just wanted to push it forward to see if we can get this gRPC update through because C++ is a pain. But Cyril's not here, so I will take this up with him offline.
We can just assign it to him. That's what happens when you don't show up.
Yeah, I've already asked him to do some stuff.
Robbie, you wanted to talk about high density game servers.
Yeah, so this was something that got brought up in some of the conversations at KubeCon, and I think I'd heard discussed before, and then coincidentally somebody also filed an issue with a whole bunch of really great background, so that sort of helps set the stage as well. So I linked the issue here. It's 1197. Basically, the idea is that there is quite a lot of overhead in running a full pod plus sidecar for a game server instance. This works just fine for larger game servers where they have a lot of resource utilization. They're pretty beefy anyway, and it's okay to sort of spin a new one up each time you need one. But there are certain types of games where the overhead is really big, and what you want to do is you want to be able to pack lots and lots of game servers onto, say, a single machine, right? And we know that by default, Kubernetes only wants you to run sort of a smallish number of pods or containers on a single machine. I think it's on the order of like 200. And the container runtimes, even if you just spin up a VM and try to spin up Docker containers, once you hit about I think somewhere around 1,000 Docker containers, like the system just sort of falls over. And that's not even taking into account like the overheads of the kubelet, like it falls over faster. So if you want to densely pack things onto machines and you say want to run 1,000 player lobbies on a single machine, then you're in this space where you can't put them all into their own containers, much less their own game servers. And so we've had the request a couple of times to figure out like how can we more densely pack things so you have some sort of maybe like sub allocation where you have a single game server that itself can be sliced up into sort of multiple different instances that can be allocated independently. And so the issue talks about using a reference count to do this. I think that's sort of jumping to the solution space rather than sort of outlining the problem space. But it also talks about the problem space quite a bit of how do we pack these things. I think the big questions that I brought up there are things like how does it interact with like our packed allocation strategy? If we keep putting things into the same actual game server instance, do we ever get to recycle that pod? If we don't ever recycle the pod, it becomes hard to drain the node. And how do we ever recycle the node? We need to think about capacity. So if you're doing sub allocations, how many are available, how many are used, that information will need to be surfaced somewhere. This might tie into the player tracking discussion as well. We have a single SDK for the whole pod, which has sort of global health checks for the game server. But if you start doing sort of sub allocations and lots of slices of game servers, is there a way to do health checks on the individual ones? Is there a way to restart individual ones or mark pieces as somewhat healthy, right? Like if you get some issues there about how do you tell what's going on with the system and some visibility concerns. And then we need to think about like the life cycle of these sub allocations. Because right now the life cycle of an allocation is tied to the life cycle of a container. Like we know, again, if it gets unhealthy, we can just kill it. And what does it look like to have these things sort of cycle? So I know there are also people that are taking a game server and like having a session on it and then having it just go straight back into like ready so it can be reallocated without letting the container die and restart. So if you have a game where you can just sort of reuse your server code over and over, you don't actually have to go through the full like kill and restart a pod lifecycle. And so like maybe it's similar to that. And maybe we just need to say, if you're using this feature, here are all the other constraints you need to put on your game server for it to actually work. But I think there's some digging in we need to do about like how does this fit into the Agones model, and then how do we make it usable for people, right? I think it'd be pretty easy to just stick a reference counter and say like, great, you can sub-allocate, but it's not going to actually work the same way as the rest of the system. And I think it's gonna be really confusing if we just sort of tack something on.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think something that's a bit more flexible, because I feel like this is something that's going to evolve. I think there's also some interesting questions around like once a connection comes into a game server. The way I'd always called this in my head, because we've been talking about this for a while, is like game servers and game sessions. So you'd have multiple game sessions inside an individual server. And how do you know which like I feel like the role of responsibility for Agones is probably you don't know what's happening inside the game server itself, but then like how do you as the user of Agones say, okay, I'm getting some information in through port, maybe by traffic information or maybe a particular port. How do I then take that and map that back to the right place internally? Is an interesting question. And the answer to that may just be like, we give you a list and it's up to you to map things in the right way. That's totally fine, and I don't think that's unreasonable. Yeah, do we want to track this separately from a game server, maybe having like a game session CRD, or do we want to track that inside it? How do we get the configuration information for what sessions are available into into the actual game server running process, so that it knows what's going on, because it needs to be aware of like which sessions it has that are allocated and which ones to it itself, and like which ones aren't and how many there are allocated. Yeah, I think you asked some really good questions in your stuff as well, Robbie. I've had like for a week, I've had a thing that I need to write down a bunch of stuff. Originally, I was having the thought that like this maybe could be like a whole separate framework that would sit like on top of Agones. But the more I think about it, I start to think that it probably should be integrated, because I think it'll be so much more work to do a whole other thing on top. And like thinking through like how like Kubernetes has multiple different groups with different things in it. I'm like, yeah, I think that like we could just have a similar pattern, right? Like, maybe this is under core, but like, we could have a whole bunch of CRDs or other things in there. Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff in there. I think I think, if you had a whole separate framework, then you'd have like maybe a whole other SDK, and that just gets really complicated. Whereas I think we could reuse a lot of the SDK stuff that we currently have to probably leverage what's happening inside the system, for example, or and then just a game server just becomes, a game server that just has a single, like maybe 0 sessions or 1 sessions or something. If we can reuse the current allocation system, maybe somehow, then like we don't have to rebuild a bunch of stuff to have like the original thought I was also having is like you'd have a separate game session allocation that sits on top, that runs alongside. But like if we could reuse what's already happening inside the game server allocation, maybe that's something we can do. And there's probably long-term event stuff, long-term thinking on the allocation side, wherein we've talked about player tracking and being able to do basically player-based allocation. So like I want a game server that has room for 4 people. But then maybe it comes down to the game session too, whereas now you're like, I want a game session that has room for 4 people, and it starts to get more complicated. So we should think through those kind of issues as well, and make sure we have a nice flexible design. There's lots of fun stuff in there, but it's good stuff.
Yeah, so I guess my main point of bringing this up was to try and sort of put it out there, get it on people's radar, have people think about it. If this is something that people would like to use, add requirements to the issue. I think this is going to take a little bit of time to sort of design and figure out how it would work. But I want to make sure that we get as much input on what people want as we can, so that when we try to design something, we're actually going to make something that's usable, right? That's useful to people. And not just sort of design in a vacuum or design based on one person's requirements and not make it flexible enough to satisfy a whole bunch of different game types. So back to my earlier points about like what would be in the next release, I would not expect something like this to be in the next release. So, maybe we'd prioritize starting to design something, but certainly not the implementation.
Alex, you're writing a bunch of notes.
Okay, for me, I have some questions regarding fast testing. So I think we can proceed with this when we remove vendor fixes, which should be, I think, in Kubernetes 1.14. And after that, spend some time, so we're able to make some API and trip tests and some other stuff. They run pretty fast. So another another example of fast tests is when we test some functions. Do we need to add this? I mean, some utility functions, probably some caches, some other stuff. So this test usually runs more long, so it's generate random data, but it's more hard to generate those because first one was provided in further Go, for example, file. There is a support for this. So so is this fuzz testing we should use, right?
Can you explain what the fuzz testing does? I think I have maybe an idea, but I've not dug into it too much.
Yeah, there is an option when we just moving generate some random CRDs and sync usual serializing and deserializing this stuff to make sure that it works. So currently on Agones dev it works. For probably I can write some more clever tests which could make it fail, but usually this just serialize the stuff and deserialize, and so I've added some comments. So like programming Kubernetes books contain a chapter for that. So I've used example from it. It has in GitHub repo also I've pointed to this, how they doing it. Yeah, because not so much documents in Kubernetes itself. So I can only guess what they're doing, and this only book which I found was useful. This is how to do it. So I will continue following this ticket. So continue my investigation, but I think it would be after 1.14.
What's the issue with the dependencies? Is it just
I don't not sure. We don't have. We have some pointer to this vendor fixes, and we don't have API testing in it. So in the API testing, it contains all this further and possibly I found some other dependency issues. I mean, we couldn't build it with this current Go models. We just pointed it to local directory. So some dependency issues. And after that, we can move on with doing this. And what else? Regarding another kind of tests, end-to-end tests. So do we need? I see on kind, for example, when I was testing it, fails. So, and this because of networking problems, and I was not able to resolve, at least on Mac. So, do we need to have, for example, some release point? So run tests on every platform, or we should support or this end-to-end tests only for OCI?
I'd probably be more inclined to have end-to-end tests that work on like other cloud providers. I know there are like some issues with Minikube that we've had in the past, which just like we can't fix.
Yeah,
like just can't fix, or you have workarounds and that's just it. So, I don't know. I think for like kind Minikube, it's nice it works. I don't think we don't hear much like people are like, oh, this doesn't work, or there are certain issues. At least not anymore. It's more like I can't get this to work on EKS. But we have some legal issues there. Sorry, go on.
For kind, we have like developer documentation, but not like end user documentation. Like kind is not documented on the website. So while that would probably be easier to get in an EDE test than either Minikube or EKS, it's probably also way less important because I think that's more for like if a developer wants to tinker with it, it's there and we have some instructions.
Yeah. One thing I've wanted to do for a really long time is actually break out that whole install section. That's one big page of text of all the different clusters. And then it'd be much easier to be like, oh, this is how kind works and drop that in.
Right.
One day.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think
I guess what I was gonna say is I think Minikube is likely something that people might play with locally as sort of they're getting started. But you certainly can't run anything real on Minikube, right? It's a single node and it's local.
Actually, we have real people here. We can ask them. Stephen, Cami, do you Minikube, GKE? What's your development experience like?
So even when I was trying out Kubernetes and deciding what we're gonna use, I used Minikube just I think to run a Docker container to prove that it works. But other than that, I did all the testing on Google Cloud.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of Minikube development locally on my laptop, and I've been mostly doing GKE just purely all the time now these days.
Okay.
Better battery life having my cluster in the cloud on my laptop, basically.
Yep. So thank you. I think it would be useful for offline development also. So Minikube.
Yeah. I used to do that when I was traveling on a plane. I'd make sure Minikube was working. And we have a bunch of developer tools for that as well. But
yeah,
we should go back. And I'd also be really, I think also the interesting thing. No, actually, never mind. That's all right. I was gonna say working on making sure everything is easy on Windows, but that's probably less about concern.
We do use Windows.
And it never not worked.
That was very double negatives.
Everything always worked. I don't know. I never had problems using Windows and
Good.
Minikube.
In the developer tools for Agones, there is some really hacky Minikube WSL type stuff that is awful, and I just kind of want to rip out and probably doesn't even work anymore. I should probably remove it. I wrote it like 2 years ago, and it's probably all old and terrible.
Yeah, and any kind of priority on is the key conformance this ticket, so we don't have CBP tests and some Unity and Unreal, or we don't have SDK like tests covered.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. April, I think I bugged you ages ago. I don't know what we want to do around licensing for. Basically, we need to talk to lawyers about automated testing for Unity and Unreal. I'm trying to finish off the Unity stuff. I think at the very least, I can work out a way of doing like a local build and pass in your local serial, and that'll run a conformance test and do like a build of that. I want to get Watch working first. Unreal. None of us know anything about Unreal unless that's actually true and somebody here does. So we definitely need some help there. I'd like to get some Unity Unreal conformance tests. I know enough about Unity to be dangerous, so I can probably do some stuff there to automate some of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is a gap, and it's a big gap. I agree.
Yeah.
Do we have conformance tests for CPP?
No.
Oh,
No.
we should do that.
Yeah.
C++ is such a pain for us. I wish we had better stuff there.
It's really slow when it comes to build it.
Yep.
For some reason.
It is. It's super slow. We do cache the build directory, which helps a lot in the SDK, so we can continue doing that. So but like right now, like we're trying to upgrade gRPC, and it seems to be being really painful for a variety of reasons. And so we can make it so subsequent rebuilds are a lot faster. But yeah, it would be good to have conformance tests for that as well. That would be good. Yeah, I would love to have that full coverage.
Yeah. So Unity in Unreal is possible also. At least Unreal. Yeah.
Oh, we have just a few minutes left. Do we want to cover anything else? Sounds like a no.
It's been another fun year working with you all.
We should do like a, like Spotify does your year in review. We should do that for Agones.
That would be nice.
I do have just one quick question before we wrap up this year, but how does this time work for folks? Like, should we keep it at this time next year? Should we do a different time? Thoughts, opinions?
It's fine for me, but I live in the US.
No, about you.
I guess for us, it's kind of perfect time
Okay.
because it's like 5 p.m.
There's probably some bias here in that the people who are here, it works really good for, and the people who aren't here, it doesn't.
Well, that's true, but even then, it doesn't necessarily. Even if you're here, doesn't mean it works really well.
That's true.
So okay, we'll ask in Slack as well. For people, like I know Cyril had some sort of conflict for at least half of the time frame. Would love to have him be able to attend more, and I think we had talked about like swapping off every once in a while, so some of the Aussie folks could potentially join as well. So we'll probably give that a shot too.
Cool.
Yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the year and quality time with your gaming console of choice.
Oh, we have 5 minutes. What is everyone playing?
I'm not playing anything, unfortunately. That's why I'm looking forward to my 2 weeks off at the holidays.
Path of Exile is coming out with a new league on the 13th, so I'm gonna be busy for the holidays.
That is still going. That's been really good. That's really impressive, the run they've had.
Number 2.
Oh well, Path of Exile is coming out. Number 2 probably coming out like next year or 2 years from now. We're really looking forward to that.
Maybe they'll use Agones.
One day. One day it won't even be a question. I'll just be like, of course. Duh. Playing middle
Are
area.
you playing any fun Stadia games, Mark? I saw you got your controller.
Oh yeah. I can't put down Samurai Showdown.
I'm bad. I haven't even like hooked mine up yet.
I still
so-
haven't hooked mine up. I've just been
Yeah.
the thing that gets me is I'm sitting in front of the TV and I don't have a mouse or anything, and I have my Pixel book, and I'm like, oh well, Samurai Showdown's just like I can play that on my keyboard, and so I just sit there and I play that in front of the TV for like ages. And because it comes with the Pro thing too, so I don't have to pay for it.
I do love the feel of the Stadia controller. You know, I've moved it from room to room. So the other thing that I really need to do is Stardew Valley finally had an update. So that's big for people who are interested in virtual farming.
What did they add in their update?
It's like a long awaited update with like more interactions with townspeople and more fun stuff. I haven't read spoilers for a lot of it yet because I don't want to be spoiled, but yeah.
Someone's playing Witcher 3 before the TV series coming out.
Oh yeah, that too.
Well, someone made a note of it.
Yeah. I just tried it for the first time this year only. It's,
I played Witcher 1
game.
years ago, and I still have Witcher 2 sitting in my Steam queue that I haven't got to yet.
Yeah, it's fine. Something about Poland, I think. Yeah.
I'm just gonna watch the show.
I'm actually reading the books to prepare myself.
There are books?
Wow.
There are 8 books, yeah.
Of course there are. So is the TV show based on the books? Because I struggle watching TV shows that are about books because I'm like, well, I know the story, I don't care.
But you haven't read the book yet.
The books, but it will give you more knowledge about the characters.
He has swords. He runs around town romancing people. It's like that's. Sometimes he makes magic happen. Like that's it.
All
Cool.
right. Well, we will certainly chat with folks on the GitHubs and the Slacks before our next meeting, but otherwise, we'll probably see everyone in 2020. The future.
Yeah.
Cool. Have a good break, everybody.
All right.
Yep. Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.